Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to St. Paul's. More importantly, welcome to this last Sunday of the church year. This is the last Sunday of the church year. That's right. In the church's calendar, the calendar that we adhere to, the year begins with the season of Advent. Right, which is next week, right. That makes today the last Sunday of the liturgical year. And in the past, we have called it Christ the King Sunday. But over the years, the church has moved toward calling it the Reign of Christ Sunday, mostly to do away with some of that patriarchal dominating language, Christ the King, blah. Moving more toward the reign of Christ, which I think captures the essence of what this day is about anyway. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The reign of Christ Sunday. It's where we are today. An interesting factoid about this particular Sunday is that it is not some ancient feast day. It is not some ancient holiday, not at all. The concept of Reign of Christ Sunday was born around World War I. It was a way of responding to the question, just who is in charge of the world? Where does our citizenship rest? It brings up really relevant questions for me, even today, such as, to what do we belong? Where do we put our trust and our hope? What really matters? For this whole church year, you and I have been walking around through the Gospel of Matthew together. And it's very telling, isn't it, that our concluding message from Matthew is the one that we hear today. And you all know that you usually save your strongest point for the end. If you have an argument, if you're trying to make a point, if you have a list of things, you put the strongest one at the end, don't you? What matters, what's important, where can we find the reign of Christ today? Where is Jesus most present? It's crystal clear, Jesus tells us. For the past several weeks, Matthew's Jesus has been focusing on some pretty stark images. Remember, we heard the story of that king who just wanted people to come to his party, but nobody came, so he got really mad and burned down the whole city. And then one guy showed up, and the guy chewed him out for not wearing the right clothes. So there was that story. And then we heard the story about the bridesmaids waiting for the bridegroom. Some had enough oil, some did not. Open the door and let us in, they cried. But there was some judgment for those who weren't prepared, for those who did not keep their lamps trimmed and burning. And last week we heard the importance of advancing the kingdom of God, thinking about what we do with our talents, what we do with our stuff. Do we give them away, or do we hoard them, bury them in the ground? So what's up with all this judgment? We don't come to church to be judged, do we? You can talk about that later. Well, an important thing to remember is this about judgment. Judgment in this context, in Matthew's context, isn't about punishment, and it's not about making feel bad or guilty. Judgment here is about making things right. It's about setting things straight. So all of this apocalyptic literature and these images, they're about justice. Justice making. I will feed them with justice, Ezekiel says today. And you have to keep in mind that the word justice and judgment share the same root word. So what is it that Jesus is trying to make right here in this very last statement? Well, once again, Jesus talks about that future day when the Son of Man comes once and for all. And that person will sit on their throne and begin to do some sorting out, right? And you've heard it all before. The judge lays out all kinds of works of mercy. These themes should sound very familiar to you because they were introduced by Jesus in chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. Blessed are those, blessed are those, blessed are those. The judge gathers those from the nations, and lays out some dividing lines. He gathers the sheep at his right hand and calls them just part of the family. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you welcomed me. I was naked, I was sick, I was in prison, and you visited me. And then the righteous will answer, when did we do all those things? And the king will answer, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, who are members of my family, you did it to me. Then the judge will turn to those on his left. Those poor goats. I really like goats. Ooh, you that are accursed, depart from me, for I was hungry and you didn't give me any food. I was thirsty and you did not give me anything to drink. I was a stranger, you did not welcome me. Naked, you didn't give me any clothes. I was in prison, I was sick, you didn't visit me. And then those answered, Lord, when was it that we saw you a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you? And then he will answer, truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. All right, folks. This is a parable. Remember that. This is a story that Jesus is telling. But this parable, for some reason, lands very differently in my heart and in my person, in my body. And maybe it's just me. But this parable really gets to the heart of what Jesus is trying to say with his life. It is that final point, as if Jesus is saying, just in case you didn't get all of that other stuff that I've been talking about for 24 chapters, let me make this very clear. I am the least of these. And that's the whole point of Jesus coming to earth, of being born among us, is to be accessible. This God is not distant. This God is not above and beyond. This God is accessible, enfleshed, in the most stricken of the world. It couldn't be any clearer. If you did it to those folks or you didn't do it to those folks, you did or did not do it to me. So this parable, it puts a mirror smack dab in front of my face. And it holds me accountable for the way that I notice people and respond to people. The parable is crystal clear, and it makes me, if I am being honest with you, very uncomfortable. Oh, Jesus, you meant all of that for me? Was I supposed to be listening and paying attention? Was I supposed to be changing the way I act and move in the world? Remember, judgment. Judgment is about making things right. But first, it has to make things noticeable. So this parable does not let us off the hook. It holds us there. It dangles us there. The parable holds our gaze steadily upon the reign of Christ and what the reign of Christ is supposed to look like. What is important? What matters? And it's crystal clear where Jesus asks us to look. And it's not into the faces of the powerful and the privileged, and it's not to the crowns of gold and power and authority. No, the crowns of Jesus to which Jesus sets our gaze are the crowns that are often bent and banged up and bruised and broken. They're the crowns even that have been taken away from them, stolen by broken and unfair systems. In some of my research, I came across an interesting aspect of one of those pieces of the story today. I found that in Jesus' day, going to prison didn't mean locking up a person for the rest of her life. Prison in that culture was more of a holding space for those awaiting trial, a holding space. And for those who were held there for days or weeks or months, it was up to the family, to the community, to provide for them. So family members, community members of the area shared responsibility for taking food and water and drink and company. When I was in prison, you visited me. And it just makes me think about the role of the church as a community and the way we're called to take care of each other and those around us. How do we care for each other? It's a startling question. And evidently, it has always been a startling question, because that's why the person in the parable begins to ask, when was it? You notice that? When was it that I fill in the blank? Surely I did that. Or surely I didn't do that. That wasn't me. When was it that I had suspicious thoughts of someone because of the way they were dressed? When was it that I didn't show up because I didn't think it was important? When was it that I did or did not offer my support to something that was beneficial to someone else? When was it that I said I was going to be there and didn't? When was it that I got scared and decided to stay in bed and pull the covers over my head? Friends, we've all done it. I've done it. We've all been sheep, and we've all been goats. And sorting the two is no easy task. And somehow I take heart in the fact that the person in the story, like me, gets just a little bit defensive. A little bit defensive and asks, wait a minute, when did that happen? But I notice here something else, that the judge really doesn't get into the weeds and say like, well, on February 1st, 1977, you did not show up, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't do that. It's almost as if the judge knows our excuses, knows our rationalizations, and that they don't really factor in. Because we know when we show up, don't we? And we know when we don't. And I don't think that Jesus is out there somewhere with a huge holy tablet and chalk keeping tabs. Instead, the message that I think we're supposed to take away from this is that Jesus wants us to know that his primary reason for being is to be in utter and complete solidarity with the least and the last and the lost. The theological giant James Cone has written about what he calls God of the oppressed. Cone argues that God has identified so much with the oppressed to the point that their experience becomes God's experience. So judgment in this case is about the Jesus of the least of these, trying with all of his heart and being to make things right and to bring justice. And on this last Sunday of the church year, he's holding up a mirror in front of us and saying, I know you don't always get it right, and you won't always get it right, but we still have to look. So, taken in the context of Matthew's text this morning, I think Christ the King is not about divine judge or the ordering of the cosmos. It is about life here and now and how we treat and relate to one another. And something to keep in mind is that in Scripture, things that happen first and things that happen last are important. So a part of Jesus' first public ministry was the Sermon on the Mount, those Beatitudes. And here we have his last public address to the people before what happens? We turn to his trial and crucifixion. So this is his last statement before turning to that last thing. And he takes this image in all of us into that final breath. And that last final breath, once again, points to the fact that the reign of Christ is about seeing the face of Jesus in everybody we encounter. So isn't that what our ministries are about, St. Paul's? We give the crowns away. Giving those crowns away to those who do not have them, for those who have lost them, to those whose crowns have been stolen. And every time we care for the least of these, we crown Jesus. Every time we care for each other and love on each other and support each other and visit each other and think about each other and care for each other and respond to each other and notice each other, we put one of those crowns on Christ's head. And maybe that's why the hymn is called Crown Him with Many Crowns. Not just one, many crowns. And so that is what we are called to do, my fellow sheep and my fellow goats. We continue to work among ourselves and within ourselves, and among the nations to claim the reign of Christ and no other. And on this last Sunday, we remember what is important and what matters as we look into a new year in which we, crown by crown and step by step, move toward justice and making things right.